to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, we are thrilled to welcome General Stacy Clardy. General Clardy retired from the United States Marine Corps on January 1st, 2022, after almost 4 decades of military service. In his final tour as the commanding general of 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, he was responsible for developing strategies with partners and allies, experimenting with new operational concepts and capabilities, and preparing 25,000 Marines and sailors for conflict with our most consequential strategic competitor for the coming decades, the People's Republic of China. General Clardy enjoyed a wide-ranging career across the globe, ensuring the armed forces of the United States were successful in crisis and war. He commanded infantry and reconnaissance units from platoons to divisions, fought twice in Iraq during complex conventional and counterinsurgency warfare, trained and educated tens of thousands of individuals and leaders across a wide range of specialties and functional skills, and advised senior executives throughout the U.S. government in organizational prioritization and operational efficiency and effectiveness. Throughout, he maintained an uncompromising warfighting ethos, commitment to excellence, and professional leadership standards. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, General Clardy.
Thank you for having me, Hannah. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Awesome. So can you start us off today by telling us where your story begins?
Um, my story, probably the one that's relevant to this conversation, started back when I was 18 years old or so. My father was in the Navy for 30 years, very much wanted me to be a sailor and follow in his footsteps. I was in college, University of South Carolina, and somebody handed me the book called Marine about Chesty Puller, and I read that, and I said I want to be just like him. So I decided I wanted to be a Marine at that point, much to my father's chagrin. And he wanted me to be a nuclear power officer in the Navy, and I became a grunt in the Marine Corps, which to him is about as far away from nuclear power as you can get. I served my first several years as an infantry officer, of course. I went up to Quantico, Virginia as an instructor. When I was there, I was at the point where most people may have to make a decision. You're going to stay in or get out. And I made a decision to stay in to continue to serve with the Marines. My first tour of duty up to that point had been with mostly Vietnam vets. My first 2 battalion commanders had been prior enlisted in Vietnam. Both had Navy Crosses. They're about as hard and demanding a couple individuals you could possibly imagine in the Marine Corps, which says a lot. They trained hard. They made sure that we were ready to go to war if we needed to. And I learned a lot from that. And I tried to continue on in that tradition throughout the rest of my career. I also, while I was at Quantico, learned a little bit about the time of transition of the Marine Corps from a more conventional outlook on combat to maneuver warfare under Al Gray. Helped change or transition the teachings in the schoolhouses at Quantico, Virginia for officers from the more traditional type of warfare to what we call maneuver warfare. And that also changed me and basically was my bellwether for the rest of the time I was in the Marine Corps.
It's fascinating to hear kind of how those seeds got planted that prompted such a long and successful career.
Or a lack of imagination would be the other way of looking at it.
Has your father forgiven you yet for becoming a
Still alive?
Marine?
No, he has not. He's still pissed off about it. Obviously, I did okay in the Marine Corps, but he still has a hard time understanding why I went in the Marine Corps. He still asks me if I learned any new ways to dig a hole and that kind of thing.
Funny. So I know you mentioned a few people are very influential, but was there a particular event or person that, served as a catalyst for your career? Whether it was like at a crossroads, or you're trying to make a decision, but that really just kind of empowered, I guess, your journey.
Yes, obviously, for anybody who spent as much time as I did in the Marine Corps, there'd be lots of people you could point to. The one that probably had the most influence, though, was a gentleman named Wayne Rollins. He retired as a 2-star general from the Marine Corps later on, but when I was at the University of South Carolina, he was my Marine officer instructor. Very impressive man. And watching him and seeing how he led, how he managed as well, but The example he set left a long and lasting impression on me, not just me, but many others who joined the Marine Corps out of the University of South Carolina at that point. I was fortunate to serve under him as a battalion commander as well. And when he was back in the early 80s. And I can tell you, I did not like him very much when he was my battalion commander because of how demanding he was. But and the Marines struggled with him as well. But every time something about him, every time he walked in front of Marines and started talking to them, you could they just melted. Um, he was just an impressive man. Later on in my career, I ended up being the commanding general, as you mentioned, at 3 Marine Expeditionary Force out in Okinawa. He had held that job as well. So every day I walked to my office, I had to have him eyeballing me going down the passageway. I assumed he was judging me as well as I was fulfilling or trying to fill his shoes there in that particular job. But he was an impressive fellow and a hero within the reconnaissance community of the United States Marine Corps as well.
I know every journey, has its hurdles. Can you tell us what some of the biggest obstacles were that you faced in your career and, how you overcame them?
Uh, at the same time, I mentioned when I decided to stay in the Marine Corps, I wasn't doing very well. I
Oh.
had personally, my wife and I were struggling.
Mhm.
She did not, although we loved each other. She was having a hard time with the Marine Corps. I had a daughter with her as well. But I was struggling. I wasn't sure that I don't even sure I was a good Marine at that point. I was pretty self centered about who I was, what I was doing. And I realized that I needed to change my outlook on life and the Marine Corps as well, I think, and what it was I was doing. And I read a couple books about how you're supposed to love other people and interact with other people. One of the books in particular was The Road Less Traveled by a guy named Peck. And I read that book and it changed my outlook on life, but more importantly, how I looked at Marines. And at that point is when I decided that I needed to stay in the Marine Corps. My marriage did not survive. That marriage did not. I'm remarried now to another Marine. We've been married for 31 years now and had 2 daughters with her as well. Again, that shows a lack of imagination to some degree, I think, on both of our parts that we'd marry somebody else in the Marine Corps. But it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. It was a good period for transition. I was also struggling at that point as I personally, but it also had an impact on my professional career. And I think that's true for most people. You cannot
Mhm.
separate those two, particularly in the military. And I changed the way I looked at other Marines, the way I interacted with them, and how I treated them. And I also got over myself and
Mhm.
I changed my outlook on it. Wasn't about me. It was about the mission, what the country needed from the Marines, but also more importantly, as a leader, looking out for their welfare and ensuring that they could get the job done. And
Mhm.
that was about 5 years into the Marine Corps. And when I decided I would stay, as long as the Marine Corps would have me, and I was a captain. And when I made major, my wife jumped up and down thinking that we had tenure. I could stay 20 years and retire. I was pretty tickled as well. I thought that might be the end of my career. My most senior rank obviously didn't work out that way, but we were pretty happy just to get that far at that point.
That's funny. Yeah, you bring up a great point, kind of the interplay of, personal life and professional life. I think it's tempting to think those can be two separate, very compartmentalized things, especially in like stressful and like demanding careers. And I love kind of your emphasis on, kind of what's going on in one can kind of interplay with the other.
Yeah, they were. I don't think we necessarily realize that at a young age. We think we
Yeah.
can separate the two out.
Mhm.
I don't, it's not just for the military, I think in life, what you do, what your profession is, what's important to you, is also, um, it's interplayed with your, personal life and your family.
Mhm.
You can't separate, you should not try to separate the two. You should make sure that they both are, homogeneous.
Yeah. So you fought in Iraq during periods of both conventional combat and counterinsurgency. What leadership lessons from those environments did you take away, from those experiences?
Well, when you, my career, I was a battalion commander when we conducted the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So that's the conventional part. I was 18 years in the Marine Corps at that point, a battalion commander for almost a year and a half as well. So I had all those years to train for conventional operations. and to fight the type of combat that was presented to us in Iraq in 2003. I went back again in 2007 for a year as a regimental commander in the western part of Al Anbar province, and that was a counterinsurgency fight, which is completely different. I was not trained for that. We were still learning even in
Mhm.
2007, early 2007, about what counterinsurgency was and how to fight it properly. And we'd learned some hard lessons up to that point, but we were starting to learn, and at least that was my impression. The thing about both that's similar is combat. What matters in combat is your ability to fight if you need to and win. Um, I it it reinforced my belief that when you're at peace or have the time, your training needs to be as realistic as possible and demanding as possible. That's part of what Marines take to heart. They fight and is the way they know they're going to fight the way they train, and
Mhm.
make sure that they are ready. And the realistic environments, the ones you're most likely to see, you need to be prepared for, because when the rounds start to fly, your instincts will go straight back to the training you had at that point, and that all was reinforced both times I was in Iraq. Uh, Tactical decision making being a second part, particularly as it relates to officers or senior leaders within
Mhm.
the military. Um, and I'm talking at the tactical level. They have to be able to make decisions, and a lot of that comes from practice as well. In the Marine Corps, we spent a lot of time practicing making decisions on short notice to ensure that if we bump up against it in combat, that we're prepared to do those types of decision making. Counterinsurgency is not like conventional operations. I won't go into lengthy. There's manuals and books about counterinsurgency, but the thing that's different about it, the real big difference, is that you're focused not on the enemy so much, but on the population. And understanding how the population functions historically, socially, the traditions that they have. If you want to, secure them, stabilize them, support them, you've got to understand them to the best of your ability. As Americans, that's tough. We tend to put our paradigm on top of everybody else, and I
Mhm.
think that's much to our detriment. And we also can't fully understand either, but we can try,
Mhm.
and we should, and particularly in a counterinsurgency. I thought as a nation, military and our allies or the coalition that we had there, they did learn over time. It took some time, but we learned how to fight a counterinsurgency, and I think we were as good as anybody in history towards the end of our time in Iraq specifically. And I think our success. We did have success there regarding the counterinsurgency. There was other issues, obviously, in Iraq, but in terms of the fighting men and women of the United States, they had learned how to do counterinsurgency, I think, pretty well.
So there's a lot of discussion on, the changing nature of combat. So some folks claim that technology is radically changing warfare to the point that ground combat will just, be a thing of the past. What are your thoughts on, the future of warfighting?
Well, you've had other people on your podcast before. I listened recently to Ben Conable,
Hmm.
you interview. I'm going to end up saying very similar things to him. So he comes at it from a more academic perspective.
Yeah.
I come at it from a more practical perspective. But he mentioned this as well. There's a character of war and the nature of war. Clausewitz says the nature it doesn't change. It's a fight, it's a
Mhm.
clash of wills and violence, political in nature normally, but the character can change, meaning the weapons and the types of tactics and techniques we use change over time,
Mhm.
based on evolution and ordinances and learning about how to fight like counterinsurgencies and things along those lines. So those are known and should be, but but going back to even within changing a character of conflict, I believe there's certain things that will not change. And I've heard over throughout my 40 years in the military how we are going to change warfare by our use of technology, new technologies. And if you look back, at least in my career, post-Vietnam, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Cold War, certainly most recent conflicts. In general terms, it's always been true that what matters is what goes on the ground, and
Mhm.
the clash of wills between the different militaries in on the ground. and in
Mhm.
ground warfare. And I think we would be making a huge mistake if we don't think that's where it's going to end up. And in some
Mhm.
cases, want it to end up, because that's
Mhm.
where we are actually interacting with the population, where we stabilize the environment after the conflict, help them get back on their feet, or ensure that our natural interests are continued and that kind of thing. And frankly, that is, I believe, as an American fighting service member, I think that's one of our strengths, actually. We're good at that. Even though this is challenging and difficult, but I think we're good at that. When I was in the Pentagon as a three-star, and then on the Joint Staff before that, General Mattis was the Secretary of Defense. He had been my division
Mhm.
commander when I was a battalion commander as well. And he was concerned, as others were, that we were not spending enough effort and energy ensuring that our ground forces, particularly infantry, had what they needed. That 90% of the casualties we sustained in Iraq and Afghanistan were among the infantry, but only 1% of the funding in the Department of Defense went to them. And so he tried to change that with the something he called the Close Combat Lethality Task Force, which is now part of the Army. But they focus on the needs of the individual infantrymen and ensure they have what they need to fight with. But the big concern, and Ben Conable mentioned this as well, is the over-reliance or belief in
Mhm.
technology is going to fundamentally change how we fight. It
Mhm.
helps. We have to deal with it, and I want it,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it's not. We have to be careful of thinking that's going to be some sort of silver bullet to help us in the
Mhm.
next conflict.
Mhm. That's a great way to frame it. Kind of that, it's not the silver bullet. I think my background's for cyber, so a lot of AI stuff right now. Everyone's freaking out about AI enabled cyber attacks, humanoids in combat, all these things. And it's interesting to me when I talk to tech people. So folks that are kind of involved in national security, but they've never like been boots on the ground. They've never been in your shoes. Um, they think technology, like advancing technology, can almost replace or prevent, wars. And I love how you framed it up because I think it's tempting to be like this could be a silver bullet, right? So we don't have to, we don't have the casualties. But I think the way you phrased it was just great because I think that's something so many people don't understand.
And I don't want to minimize how technology can help
Yeah,
and if you can get an edge any way I can get it, I will take it.
yeah.
But to think that that's going to be determine the outcome of a conflict
Hmm.
is, I think, foolhardy. And
Hmm.
we should be. Why not do both? Why not be
Right.
prepared both ways and not give up the things that I think have set us apart over the last 250 years in
Mhm.
our conflicts and and the way in which Americans fight.
Yeah. So, as commanding general of the Marine Expeditionary Force, you were tasked with preparing forces for competition with the People's Republic of China. What distinguishes this challenge from the conflicts the U.S. military spent, the last 2 decades fighting?
It It's a good question, but obviously one that we've been wrestling with
Yeah.
after spending so much time in Afghanistan
Mhm.
in particular, but also Iraq. Our focus on mostly counterinsurgency, counterterrorism in some
Mhm.
cases, but very much at the more tactical level. Something that needs to be understood about fighting in a more conventional sense, but
Mhm.
certainly on a larger sense against what we call either a near peer competitor,
Mhm.
pacing threat like China, which has as good or in some cases better capability and capacity than we do. We need to think about the different levels of war, basically
Mhm.
the tactical, the operational, and strategic.
Mhm.
In a counterinsurgency, which were primarily doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, those three things collapse on each other. So what happens at the tactical level has strategic implications generally, and the operational decision making that goes on in the middle, the operational art, is all kind of condensed into something that's that's coincided. They coincide
Mhm.
with each other. At the more larger scale conventional fighting, a war, we have to think about those, I think, distinctly separate from each other.
Mhm.
a role for certain types of forces in each, and certainly leadership in each to make the kind of decisions to allow us to win. Um, the other things that come up, and again, we could talk hours about this, I'm sure, but unlike in a counterinsurgency where we had pretty much superiority anywhere we went, that won't be true in a conventional fight against a near-peer competitor. We have to create the opportunity to get superiority at a place of our choosing, at a decisive point on the battlefield, because we can't be assured to have that. Whether you're talking about aviation, ground, at sea, doesn't really matter. We
Mhm.
have to be focused on when and where we have that superiority, so we can accomplish the objectives we're trying to. Um, Freedom of maneuver is very important. Again, in a counterinsurgency, we had pretty much freedom of maneuver. Even with IEDs, we still could maneuver wherever we needed to, whenever we needed to, certainly by air, but also on the ground. That won't necessarily be true. It won't be true probably with a near-peer competitor.
Mhm.
And the last, which is the most difficult to talk about, is casualties and loss.
Mhm.
Because of the capability and capacities of a near-peer competitor, they will cause damage. They will destroy equipment, and we will have losses, whether wounded or killed. Uh, and it will overflow into the civilian population as well. And something we need to expect, not necessarily in the United States specifically, but it can be in those places around the world where we might have the conflict.
Mhm.
And we need to be able to deal with that as an American people to ensure that we maintain the will to see it to the end.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great description of kind of, counterinsurgency versus near peer competitor. I think that's something that a lot of, folks alive today in the United States haven't, witnessed. We weren't around for World War II. We didn't see that level of combat.
For the people my age,
Mhm.
I wasn't in World War II. I'm not quite that old, but or even Vietnam for that matter. But we did have the Cold War, and we
Mhm.
spent a lot of time and energy and training ensuring we were prepared to fight Soviets, which is the same idea, near peer competitor, not on the Pacific side of the world, but on the European side of the world and in that part of Asia. And the things that we learned then, or thought we understood,
Mhm.
have direct application to what we have in the future against another near peer competitor. The same types of things will come up, and we need to be prepared for that. In the books, if you go back and look at the books and uh, both government books, but also manuals and other things, you'll see things that we can certainly learn from in our experience in preparation for any type of fight with the Soviets.
Mhm. That's very, very insightful. I guess it's been about, well, almost 20 years now. My first trip anywhere was I left rural Mississippi and took a trip to Beijing, China, just because it was like on the other side of the world and they were having the Summer Olympics. And I was like, oh, this will be so cool. And so I went over there, had no like cultural competency, couldn't speak Mandarin, like had never been on an airplane before. So this was very intense. But one thing that I think about China a lot now, especially, with what's going on in the world, that population, that culture was quite shocking to me coming from America. Then, do you think, that we have a good handle kind of on that population element when it comes to China as we look to the future now, or do you think it's like a gap, like some of, the other areas that we fought in that maybe it took us a while to kind of understand what they're wanting, what they're angling at, what they're coming from?
In 2019, when I took over command of the 3MEF, um, I'd been out to Japan before and
Okay.
served. I was division commander there as well. We were mostly focused on Korea, by the way,
Yeah.
in North Korea specifically. Um, there was also some other small conflicts going on around the region, but that was the main threat we were concerned about,
Mhm.
what our responsibilities to the South Korean people. In 2019, the Commandant of the Marine Corps changed the direction of the United States Marine Corps towards China.
Mhm.
And when I went back after this happened within 2 or 3 months of me taking command, when I went
Mhm.
back after he talked to me about what he wanted, I went back out there and we started hunting around for expertise in China, and there wasn't a lot. I don't want to say we didn't have a lot in the United States, but it wasn't
Mhm.
there. And we had to start hunting for expertise. We had to learn a lot about not just the military, which we
Mhm.
didn't have a good handle on, but also the population, as you speak of, in the society and the government, how they operate and the way they make decisions. All that had to be learned. I don't know if it was relearned, maybe, but it was definitely had to be learned. The fortunate thing is we have a lot of great institutions in the United States, both academic and government, that can help you come up to speed pretty quickly. We've had people who focused on China even during the times when we were Iraq and Afghanistan. So just finding those people was important, and we did find them. And but is there a gap? Sure. I think we could always have more information, more knowledge uh, about those who we consider our adversaries, if potentially even in a conflict, our enemies. And the more we know, the better. The problem with the military, which I've seen over throughout my career, is they had an expectation that each of us would have some sort of expertise in a particular part of
Mhm.
the world. The problem with that is trying to figure out where that might be. And
Mhm.
if you're like me from South Carolina and graduated the University of South Kakalaki, I barely understand English and American history, much less somebody else's. So I would say that it's been uh, it's been something a little bit out of my reach from my time in the military. There's a book behind me when I went to Iraq in 2003 that somebody handed me, which was a godsend. It was The Idiot's Guide to Iraq, and that was all the only thing I had to read about in terms. It was actually pretty good. It gave me at least an overview of what Iraq was like.
Yeah.
Gave me a starting point when I went there in 2003. When I went back for 2007, there was a lot more to read and a lot more to understand.
Mhm.
We had a lot more information at that point. But usually, if we try to predict where we might think we're going, it's probably going to be wrong. And
Yeah.
and if you work in that part of the world like I did, each of those countries to us it's different. It's difficult to understand or appreciate the difficulty, the complexity,
Mhm.
the contradictions, the history, the way those different countries and ethnic groups there in that part of the world interact with each other. And if you don't try to understand them, we're good. If we don't spend the time and effort to learn, and if we don't humble ourselves to those who do know what's going on, to include our allies and our partners, then we'll make mistakes early in a conflict, which may become difficult to overcome.
So you trained and educated, tens of thousands of Marines, military leaders. What leadership traits did you find most difficult to instill, even in, highly capable people? And then what traits do you consider, the most important, in mid to senior level leaders?
Well, the answer for me is kind of the same for both questions in a way. Um, and we're talking at the more senior level, whatever you think that might
Mhm.
be, within the military. But there's a perception, and if you read books on leadership, which I've read a lot of them, I found out when I retired, everybody's an expert on leadership.
Mhm.
Everybody writes about leadership too. But they, if you read most of those books, you get the impression that um, it's a thing, leadership, but it's not. If I've learned anything about it, it changes as you move up in the ranks, so to speak. And it's true whether you're in the military or in business, it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
The type of leadership you have to display as a general is not the same leadership you display as a lieutenant, platoon commander. And it doesn't mean they're opposite each other or not connected. They are, and you have to appreciate what goes on at the platoon level. And the people at the platoon level need to know you know what they're doing and how they're doing it. But what they expect from you as a general is not the same thing. And the type of leadership you should be able to present is different. The types of leadership traits I look for, and the Marine Corps has a list of traits, by the way, and these
Mhm.
are in them. The two that I found to be the most important, the ones I usually judged my subordinates on for promotion, the ones that mattered to me the most. Well, the first one was judgment. Um, Judgment starts off with a knowledge and certainly experience. It forms and helps your judgment. But there's something else that goes to that for people who I consider to have the best judgment. I'm not sure I can explain what it is. I can't quantify it or qualify it very much, but there's some sort of sauce that they sprinkle on their decision making where they have a better uh, an ability to see things that others can't see, to project into the future, to feel something, to you trust their gut. I don't know what it is, but it's something where I think certain individuals are able to make good decisions and judgment and using their judgment over time, and it's resonant in certain individuals more than others. And it's difficult. You can teach judgment from a standpoint of knowledge and uh, experience, but in the end, if they don't have that sauce, it doesn't matter. The second one is decisiveness, and I mentioned decision making. What I mean by that is not so much the ability to make a decision, but know where they have to be to make that decision, what information they need to make that decision, how much time they have to make the decision, or when they should make that decision. There's and then all those things combined to help them uh, decide. I've seen people freeze up because they couldn't make a decision for whatever reason. They didn't want to make a decision because they're being cautious. They didn't feel like they had enough information. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about when you don't have enough information, what do you do? But those are can be also similar to judgment, difficult to teach people about how to make decisions. There are plenty of people out there walking around in the military and outside the military who do not like making decisions because once you make a decision, somebody's going to judge you for that decision.
Mhm.
And the thing I enjoyed in my time in the Marine Corps is I got to command. The big part of that was the authority to make decisions. And I relished that. And I knew that maybe others would not agree with things I was deciding. In some cases, they might not even go well. But I wanted to be the one making those decisions. And there are people out there, you can teach them how to make a decision and what needs to be included to make that decision. But in the end, um, there's also some sauce there that has to be on that about the timing of it, when to make it, and who needs to be in the room to advise you about making that decision, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
The last is the newest trait of the Marine Corps, which is empathy. We just added it to our list. Um, and I won't talk much about it because there's a lot of people talking about empathy these days, but I was one of the ones who pushed for that to be included because I think if you can't be a good leader unless you can understand or see or be able to visualize walking in the shoes of those who work for you. Uh, but it's more than that, even. It's the ability to see, for example, in a counterinsurgency, understanding the population and
Mhm.
helping to, if you can't understand the population, if you can't understand the enemy for that matter, you're, I think, doomed to failure as a leader, but also in a battle. And I think that it's an important trait to have as a leader. And one, again, I'm not sure can be taught, although I don't think I had empathy as a young officer.
Mhm.
And once I made a decision that it was about selfless service, then I think I changed and I became more empathetic towards those who work for me in particular, but also those around me.
Mhm. Oh, that's an interesting way to frame it. Do you think with decisiveness, do you think people have to have kind of like a willingness to assume responsibility for, basically the consequences of their decision? Like, I guess I've just been thinking about kind of in general culture. I feel like people are kind of responsibility avoidant. It's like they're quick to judge other people making decisions, but they won't, they won't sign up to be the person in the hot seat. And I guess I just wondered what your thoughts were kind of on responsibility and kind of under that leadership umbrella.
Well, in the Marine Corps, and it's true for the other services, I'm sure, certainly in the military, and it should be universal, is if you're
Mhm.
in a position to make decisions or leader, you are responsible for what goes on in that organization, good or bad, doesn't matter. And you can't delegate that responsibility.
Mhm.
You own it. Now, how much you should be held accountable for that is a
Mhm.
different conversation.
Mhm.
So if you have an individual in an organization who does something poor,
Mhm.
and makes a bad decision and something happens, you still own it because he's one of your people.
Mhm.
I'm responsible for it, but I may or may not need to necessarily be held accountable for that decision since I wasn't the one who made it. And as long as I've done my part in his training, um, in my assignment to tell him what to do or whatever it might be, as long as I've done what I was supposed to do, then I may or may not be held accountable for it. But I have to own it though. It is my responsibility. I certainly have to fix it when if something like that happens. That's the way we're taught in the Marine Corps. I think it's useful and helpful. I don't think
Mhm.
anybody wants to work for somebody who doesn't take responsibility for not just their own actions, but the actions of the whole organization. And if I learned anything in the Marine Corps, that was it. And I think it's a healthy and important part of developing an organization, not just the Marine Corps as a whole, but also tactical units. They want to know the lieutenant has their back. They want to know the lieutenant's taking responsibility for what's going on in the organization, that he feels personally responsible for everything that goes on there. And if they see that, they will follow you.
So you've made decisions with strategic, political, and human consequences. How do you approach decision making, when information is incomplete and time is limited?
Um, I'll hit this from two different directions. First off, obviously, in the near term, I'm sorry, long term, you have to create trust amongst those who are working for
Mhm.
you. And the less amount of time you have, the less information you have, the more you have to rely on others to either act or decide in the organization. If you don't have days or months to develop a course of action, for example, you only have minutes, then the only thing you can do is tell them what you want accomplished. They need to figure out how to do it. And if you haven't built the trust with them to do that, then you've failed, I think, as a leader. So that trust has to be built. Second, that you need to know your organization. There's a business management by walking around, but I used to lead by walking around. The best leaders, I believe, not because of what I did, I learned this from them, is that you need to be out and about, walking around and know your organization. You can't know everything about it. You have specialists and people who have different kinds of experiences than you have, but you need to be trying to learn the different parts and pieces of the organization you're in charge of and know it pretty well. If you don't, when your time is limited, or you don't have if you don't have time to make it, if you don't have the time you really want or the information you're looking for, you're going to have to trust them again to be able to get it done. And you need to have an inherent understanding about what they're doing and how they do it.
Mhm.
And the last is about cohesion, which is a leadership responsibility, building a cohesive unit. It kind of relates to trust. I won't go into much of that, but I will talk about one aspect of it, the second part, which is about process. Nick Saban, the famous Alabama football coach, which I'm not an Alabama fan because I'm a Gamecock from South Carolina, but I certainly have to respect what Nick Saban did at Alabama with the football team. He was his big emphasis was always on process, not on winning and losing or what was going to happen on Saturday, but what really the process and having faith in the process and basically controlling what you can control. You control when you have back in your garrison area, you're working, you're in peace, relative peace, using that time to develop and be prepared for when you won't have that time. And you're in a game, for example, in the case of football, and things are not going the way you expect them. But at least you've controlled the things you can. Uh, Realistic training, hard training, physical weapons expertise, those types of things. You want all that to be there when you need it. And at times you really need it, you're not going to have time to create it.
Mhm.
And the only way you get there is through process.
Mhm.
So that's the framework that I use. And I'll give you one example of framework. For example, as a military leader, especially as a commander, you have to issue orders. It's not just about making a decision, it's about relaying that decision to the subordinate commands underneath you or units. That orders process is as important as making the decision itself, because if I can't articulate and communicate my decisions in a way that's useful to them, then I've failed also. So, every unit I belong to include up to the MEF, I would have a 24-hour process for creating an order. I had a 6-hour process for creating an order, and I had a 30-minute process for creating an order. So, and we practiced those. It was a
Mhm.
process because sometimes you don't have any time and you better know how you want to relay information. And so we practiced and made sure we could do that. I also believe as a Marine that we're expeditionary. And if you can't get up and move in 30 minutes, you're probably not expeditionary.
That's a good way to put it. So after retiring from the Marine Corps, you've continued advising organizations in both public and private sectors, including private equity, drone companies, and startups. What leadership gaps do you see most often, outside of the military?
Um, First off, the organizations that I've dealt with were pretty well led, actually. They were successful in their own way. A lot of them had, I deal with a lot of startups and small companies.
Mhm.
They, I find it more interesting.
Yeah.
Much money in it, I'll tell you that, but it's a lot more interesting. But most of them were technicians, or engineers, if because I deal in advanced technology sometimes, and they are truly experts in their field in some cases. But from a leadership standpoint, they're very hyper focused on management,
Mhm.
their resources, the process for developing the product, whatever it might be, and they're hyper focused on that, and they can only see about a day out or 2 days,
Mhm.
not literally, but like that. The thing that I found to be the biggest gap with organizations that are trying to grow is they have a hard time with what would be called strategic leadership
Mhm.
within the business world. Even in the military, be called that maybe, but it would be at the more senior general officer level. But strategic leadership has two main functions, and if your leader doesn't do these, then you're not going to have a strategic direction.
Mhm.
First is a strategic leader needs to have a vision about the future. And that could be 5 years, 10 years down the road, whatever it might be, where he thinks that organization should be.
Mhm.
And you have to develop a map to get there. But if you don't have the end state you're looking for, where you want to be or what you want it to look like, the people under you can't go there because they don't know. And if you don't give them that. So you have to create that. Um, the second part of it is you have to be able to communicate it. The best leaders that I served with were tremendously gifted in the way in which they communicated to their subordinates, because they simplified things. General Mattis is famous for one of his sayings he came up with prior to our invasion of Iraq in 2003, which is no better friend, no worst enemy. Um, that basically uh, encapsulated his philosophy of command of the First Marine Division during the invasion and governed and governed the way in which we operated. And it told us what the end state might look like. That we're not
Mhm.
here to destroy Iraq. We're here to, um, destroy, if you will, the Iraqi military and the regime as well. But the Iraqis themselves were not our enemy. And he made that clear in that simple statement. General Krulak, one of our former commandants, had a similar gift about communicating what he thought was important, whether, we make Marines, we win battles and make Marines. He'd say that, which kind of lays out who we are as Marines. Or when he was talking about conflict, he talked about the three-block war. I won't go into detail what that looked like, but he was able to come up with things like that made it easy for him to share his vision of the future and what he was looking for. And I think that's an important part of, even it doesn't matter whether it's military or the business world,
Mhm.
you have to be able to do that if you want to grow or
Mhm.
be the best
Mhm.
or good to great, depending on who you want to quote on something like that. But the last thing I'll mention is related to that is thinking, taking the time to sit back and think. That's true in the military, certain true in business. If the leader of an organization doesn't take the time to sit back and think about things, about where they are, what they're doing, honestly, assessing how they're doing is in charge, that kind of stuff. If they're not doing those things, and I saw very few who did in the business world, read maybe, whatever, but, contemplate and think about things. If you don't do that, you're not going to be all that much useful at the strategic level or the senior leadership of any organization.
Yeah, your description of strategic leadership kind of applied in that startup context really resonates with me. Um, we started a business, I guess it's been, well, now 11 years, but in government contracting. And initially it was just me, my husband, bootstrapped. We'd get a contract, we'd go and we'd lead these very small training programs. And General Clardy, that's easy when it's just the two of us because I'm a perfectionist, so I can just micromanage it from start to end. And, for years, I lamented, like, we've got to get these big contracts. We've got to get these big contracts. And we eventually, we did. And your description of, the need for strategic leadership really resonated because when we first got those big contracts, we had training engagements all across the nation going on at the same time, which meant I could not micromanage everyone. Like it was impossible. And that is when I had chest pains with the business, not when it's like a bootstrap. You're not sure if you're going to make it. You're working all the time. It's like I realized I could not be just boots on the ground controlling it. And it takes a whole different perspective and a whole different skill set. And it came to the point where, for me at least, it was a crossroads, kind of like you described. If you want to grow, you have to be able to develop into operating at a strategic level. And that was just, it was a real realization for me. It was like, I cannot micromanage every aspect of this. I'm going to have to develop new skills, have a new approach to this. And it was really a shift that I think it just really, hit the nail on the head with your description.
Well, I learned when I was a regimental commander in Iraq in 2007. Um, I was used to, I've been trained up to that point more conventionally where, even up to regimental level, you would have your three battalions out in front of you, or two in the front, one behind you, whatever. But they were around you. And
Yeah.
you could talk to the commanders and you could see what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
In Iraq in 2007, I had my area of operations was the size of South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
I had 6,000 American service members working for me. They rotated I had a rotation every 3 months or so with people coming in and out so I had to reestablish rapport and relationships
Mm-hmm.
every 3 months or so. And I had another 10,000 Iraqi security forces working for me in five major urban areas. And my leadership skills I had as a lieutenant would not apply in that particular situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to learn quickly how to lead across, to unify and provide cohesion across that large area of operation, which was pretty diverse, and to ensure that we were all kind of working in a unified way with efficiency and effectiveness across that whole area of Western Al-Anbar province.
That kind of goes back to what you brought up at the beginning, how leadership changes. It's not like one thing that you achieve and you're just done.
Well,
Very true.
I think some people believe that, and it's reflected in how they, there's general officers in history that, and I won't bring up names here, that when they were tremendous colonels and
Yeah.
even brigadiers in some cases, but once they got promoted to major general or lieutenant general,
Mhm.
they failed miserably because they
Mhm.
never made that, they could not make that transition, which I generally that's where I would say the change really has to occur if it hasn't occurred before that.
Mhm.
And there's lots of generals who failed after at some point in their career because they just got promoted to a point where they're whatever skills they had or they had not did not were not willing to learn. I'm not sure which they ended up failing.
Mm. That's very interesting. So, can you tell us about your current research work as a senior fellow with the Center of Naval Analyses?
Yes. This uh, when I left active duty, Center for Naval Analysis, which is a FFRDC, federally funded research and development
Mhm.
corporation. I think I got that right. They've been around since World War II. They do analysis for the Department of Navy, both for the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps. They asked me to come on as a senior fellow because of my experiences, mostly out in the Western Pacific. They wanted the most recent person had been out there, so I came in to help them out. I told them that I wanted to do more than just pontificate. I wanted to
Mhm.
do some research and write if I could. And so the program or project I'm working on right now is called, it's about the Special Purpose MAGTFs, Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Forces that we stood up after the attack in Benghazi in 2012. We didn't have the same number of Marine Expeditionary units we'd had in the past. We were unable to provide crisis response there, along with the large other parts of the United States military. And we created these Special Purpose MAGTF, which is a small version, really, of a new Marine Expeditionary Unit. It has aviation. Instead of a battalion, you have a company-sized unit, that kind of thing. And they are there to help ensure or protect reinforce American facilities like embassies, look out for American interests, look out for Americans as well. We stood them up and sent them over in support specifically of Africa. We ended up setting up a second one a year later, uh, and for Central Command. They were supposed to be temporary. They ended up operating for almost over 8 years before they were stood down in 2021. Um, like many things, Ben Conville talked about this as well. We did not spend the effort to try to learn from them. We did not document or collect the documentation associated with why we stood them up, how they operated over those years. things that they did well, things they did not do well, things we could do better if we tried to do it again in the future. So I took that on as a project for them. Rounded up all the information that was available on the Special Purpose MAGTAS, collected it, centralized it, logged it, organized it, and we were in the process of finishing a paper specifically about it to help for senior decision makers in the future to be able to learn from our experience with Special Purpose MAGTAS.
So when it comes to the future of defense and national security, I know there's a lot of new things. Can you tell us kind of what's on your radar? What developments you're tracking and kind of what trends concern you?
Um, yes, I'm going to mostly focus on the things that concern me, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, I will, at the end here, I'll talk a little bit about what things haven't changed and things that don't concern
Mhm.
me. But the thing that does concern me is somewhat some of the experiences we gained, the wrong lessons I thought we may have pulled out of places like Afghanistan or Iraq.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe some of the wrong things I see going on within the Department of Defense that concern me in terms of our ability to fight and win our nation's wars. So I'll give you a couple. There's more than a few probably, but I'll give you a couple anyway, or three or a few. First one is about the idea of networking. Um, we have this belief that if we network every unit together, that somehow we'll be more capable and more lethal.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I buy that 100%. I'm not against networking, but I don't believe that that is, again, a key to success for the future necessarily. We need to be prepared to not to operate without that network because our near peer competitors are going to attack our network, and we can't assume that we're going to have that to be able to fight in the future. It also drives centralized decision making, networking, meaning that if I can talk to everybody, then the decision making can be made at a higher level than at the lower level. I think that's also detrimental. I think we should be encouraging and pushing decision making to the lowest level possible so that we don't have to, ask our father or big brother uphill to help make a decision for us, that we're in a position to make the decision without them. And frankly, that'll make us faster and more lethal if we do it that way. So
Mhm.
that's one thing that concerns me. Lawyers concern me. We've fallen into this trap where we have to have lawyers helping us make decisions to see if
Mhm.
they're legal or not. We have things like rules of engagement, law of war, that kind of thing that are our guideposts. We have a chain of command as well. We have guideposts, these guideposts to help us make decisions that are appropriate for the conflict, whether it's combat or otherwise. I'm not against having lawyers in the military, and I've got many good friends that were lawyers in the military. But I think, are overusing lawyers
Mhm.
to assist us with making decisions at the most senior levels in the military and even at the more junior levels in the military as well. That you can't make a decision unless some lawyer blesses off on it, who in reality has no experience in most cases about what you're actually dealing with because that's not their job, and so that concerns me. Relearning hard lessons that, similar to my study with the Special Purpose MAGTAS,
Mhm.
we don't do a great job of capturing information, studying and analyzing when we have the opportunity. There's an effort going on right now that's directed by Congress called the Afghanistan Commission.
Mhm.
It's a 3 or 4 year process where, similar to 9/11, trying to dissect what happened in Afghanistan specifically. And that type of looking back and studying is important. But that is being led by, it's directed by Congress and led by mostly civilian, some military mixed in, of course. But the military needs to do that kind of thing and take an honest assessment of ourselves. The Army did a pretty good job taking a look at what they did in Iraq, by the way. They published a multi-volume set
Mhm.
specifically to their involvement in Iraq, but it only covers the Army. There's some mention of other units, but it's mostly about the Army. But I have been disappointed overall with my own service, the Marine Corps, and other services, and in Department of Defense as a whole, not capturing and analyzing and studying conflicts, particularly when they're going on, certainly after the fact, so that we don't repeat the mistakes that we made. We learn from them and change our doctrine or whatever to ensure that we learn from those. The
Mhm.
last thing I'll mention is overthinking things. This kind of goes back to technology to a degree. When I was in the Pentagon, particularly when I was on the Joint Staff, I was in requirements,
Mhm.
and frankly, I was not enthused about anything unless it was a bullet of some type or something that threw the bullet. Everything else was sort of interesting, but only just a little bit interesting to me. I said, if you can't show me how this is going to help the infantrymen on the ground
Mhm.
win the next conflict, or the pilot in the air, or the guy on a ship, meaning throwing something at the other guy or woman, if that's not what it's doing, then I'm not all enamored with it. Nothing against cyber, because I
Mhm.
always ask the cyber guys, what does your weapon actually look like? I want to know what that bullet is that you're sending down range. And I know they have them, but I used to give them a hard time about that. But I think we need to keep things, we tend to overthink what we're trying to accomplish. And in the end, it comes down to how our lethality will come down to how effective we are when things are uncertain, things are dangerous, and we will be struggling. And the things that we have to fight with have to be reliable. And if
Mhm.
they're not, we will fail and or we will get people killed or both. And I
Mhm.
think that that's something I saw in my job in the Pentagon is how much we tended to overthink things.
Mhm.
And I think we could do better there.
Mhm. So can you tell us about the mission and impact of 9/11 Promise and how you got involved with the nonprofit, serving on the board and why it's important to you?
All right, so if you're a senior military, not just generals, when they retire, there's a bunch of nonprofits out there like circling sharks wanting to grab onto you and bring you in an organization because they're not going to pay you anything. They might want you to pay them,
Yeah.
and then they definitely want you to work. It's not like,
Mhm.
it's not a typical idea of what a board is and or a volunteer. Uh,
Mhm.
they really do expect you to do things. And I got one of the ones I got sucked into was the 9/11 Promise. And I say that tongue in cheek because it's a great organization. It was set up in 2016 by a young woman named Jen DePoto who did not have any direct relationship or um, was not directly impacted by 9/11, meaning she didn't have a father or a mother or somebody who had been there. She didn't even have anybody in the military after that. But she thought she was young, she was in her 30s. She just was
Mhm.
concerned that people would forget about what happened there. And she stood up this 9/11 promise to honor those who sacrificed. The organization has grown in terms of mission, but what they do is they provide merit-based scholarships, $5,000 to $15,000 to children of disabled and deceased first responders and veterans
Mhm.
or service members. And they do that every year. The way they raise money is through a relay run between the Pentagon and Ground Zero, 240 miles. They do it on the 9th, 10th, and 11th of September. This year is the 25th anniversary of that event, tragic event, and we will continue with that. If anybody's interested, I'll I'll throw this out from a marketing perspective or advertising. But if anybody's interested in participating or volunteering or supporting or sponsoring or donating, if you go to our website, which is the 9/11 Promise, just written just like that, .org, it has all the information there.
But it sounds like a terrific organization.
By the way, I will be running this race too. So I did.
Oh, wow.
It's not a race, it's a relay, but I did it 2 years ago, put a team together, and I'm going to do it again this year.
Wow.
I don't
That's
think
so
I'm the oldest. I don't think I'm the oldest guy doing it, or woman, but I'm one of them.
that's great. You lead by example.
I don't know about that. It's the only way I get people to do it is that they say, "Well, if you do it, I'll do
You
it."
did. I know. I know you take away all our excuses.
That's what-
My knee pain does not compare to your knee pain.
Well, you end up being stuck in a van with 10 or 12 other people, which is also in of itself an interesting event. Bunch of everybody smelly and stinky living in a van for that many days is to include family members and others. But it's a very something I didn't realize. I think intellectually I did, but as we take off, I worked at the Pentagon after 9/11. There's a memorial there, which is really moving and what have you. But when you leave there and go north, as you go up the route, we do mostly back roads directly up to New York City. But as you get closer and closer to New York City, and we're hosted by the fire departments on the way up and police departments along the way. We stay in firehouses at night to get sleep, that kind of thing. As you get closer to New York, those fire departments and police departments participated in the response to 9/11 directly. and they have it's quite moving to interact with them. It's a source of pride that comes with, you know, I don't know, their field, their profession, but it's also they know how tragic it was directly because they were there, but it's also because they contributed directly, not just to their community, but to their nation directly. And it's some pretty impressive group of first responders you interact with going up there, particularly as you get closer to New York. And I found it quite moving.
It sounds like a very a fascinating event, and what a great way to commemorate, the contribution so many people made in connection to that tragic day.
Yes.
So, any final words of advice or parting thoughts for the audience?
Sure. Um, I this will be kind of all over the place, but the first is, you know, um, I think this applies to most of your audience. The study of war is a study of history. And, it's easy to pull up your computer and Google things. I do it all the time, using AI even to help you organize things. But I believe in going to the source in most cases and reading the books and the histories of our conflicts over the ages. And if you study the wars that we've been involved in, but others as well throughout human history, you can't have help but grow your own knowledge about war, but also about who we are as human beings. And I implore people to do that. I'm surrounded by books here. I don't consider myself a great reader. I read a lot, but I always find people who are significantly more well-read than me. I think I implore people to do that. I think we need to read books, not just excerpts of that,
Mhm.
to try to understand. And so I would say that. The second is it's related to something else I talked about earlier about looking for the exquisite as
Mhm.
opposed to just good enough.
Mhm.
Um, the equipment we buy today for the U.S. military takes a long time to build. And I'm talking things like tanks, airplanes, ships, and what have you. If we're in a conflict with a near peer competitor, we cannot replace most of that equipment very fast because of how hard it is to build. And I like good, exquisite things. But we also have to be able, if we're going to have losses of that equipment, we have to be able to replace it. And we're never going to have a stockpile big enough to replace everything we have in a long-term conflict. We need to be able to build things quickly, similar to what you saw, obviously during World War II, but on a different scale, maybe smaller than that. But we need to be careful. We should be able to build things fast enough to help our service members and um, country be able to fight a war if necessary for our own defense or for the defense of others. Um, Third is about, this kind of goes back to reading. My favorite book on war is, and frankly, the war I spent a lot of time studying years ago, but I find to be the most interesting is the Korean War because it's after World War II and our
Mhm.
successes there and how abysmally we failed in the earlier parts of the conflict, considering how close it was to our successes in World War II. And there's a book called This Kind of War by Fehrenbach, written 50 years ago, that studies the war in a lot of detail. And somebody handed it to me one time when I was a captain. I read it. It's still my favorite book on war because it teaches us, it lays bare the mistakes, but also the things we did well too, of course. But it's a warning to the future that if we don't learn and about what we did in the past, but also aren't prepared for the future, uh, we run the risk of catastrophic failure. Maybe uh, um, fail in defense of our own country, and we have to
Mhm.
be careful about that. So I would tell people who want to, if they really want to understand at least that part of my concerns about the future, that would be a book to go read if you haven't read it yet. And the last thing I'll mention and is about Americans. I mentioned that I was going to get out of the Marine Corps after 5 years. I decided to stay. One of the reasons I stayed, and the reason I stayed for almost 40 years is because I like Marines. I like them a lot. I think more importantly, I like Americans. There's something about Americans. I've served all over the world. We have this light in our eyes, this spirit. Sometimes that gets us in trouble, sometimes a lot of trouble, but it's really unique in the world. And when you infuse that into our military, it makes a fighting uh, person, man or woman, um, the envy of the world. I interacted with our other militaries around the world. They don't know, they do not understand how we can get young lance corporals and corporals to take charge of squads and take them off into battle and fight with them.
Mhm.
They don't understand that. They don't understand how we can, how, you know, eager they are to want to go to combat. I mean, they
Mhm.
really do want to go to combat. They want to prove themselves. They like the idea, the challenge of that. When I was a regimental commander in Iraq, I had 82 positions at one point. Some of those are being led by sergeants and corporals, separated by miles from their counterparts, their peers, in some of the most austere and barbaric places in the world, dangerous. And they were happy. And they loved being there. They loved what they were doing. And they were good at it, really good at it. And if I learned anything over 40 years is we have got great young Americans in this country who are ready to go off and fight for us anytime we want them to. And I don't think that's diminished in time. I think it's actually grown, to be honest with you. And I know we're having trouble with recruiting and all that kind of stuff. But when the rubber meets the road, there's no other force in the world as good as our U.S. military. And I'm proud to have been among them the years I was there. And it's the only reason I stayed. I, I I hate using the word love because it kind of
Mhm.
it's kind of squishy, but that's what I did. I loved them. And they were awesome. And I'd still do anything in the world for them. And this is one of them, being on your podcast to be able to talk about it. It was a great 40 years of my time, and something that both me and my family are proud to have been a part of.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, General Clardy, for coming on and sharing your insights and experiences. I know your contributions to our nation have impacted so many, and I so enjoyed chatting with you about
Same
about
here.
your journey.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I certainly wish you the best with the podcast. And I looking at the list, and I've not listened to all the podcasts. I did, is it follow or I forgot what subscribed. I did
Okay.
subscribe, so I'll continue to follow you as you go forward, okay? Because the quality of the people you're picking, I'm excluded from that list, I think, but the quality of the people you brought in and are talking to, I think is great, and I encourage you to keep going.
Well, I really appreciate it. But to our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of Tipping Spheres with Hannah Becker. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.